Cool. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to get to finally give you some updates and show you some. I mean, they kind of look like children's drawings. I'm not going to lie with the final maps that we have, but they're still really informative. So my name is Blair Schneider. I'm at the Kansas Geological Survey, which is here at the University of Kansas. But I really also like to emphasize that the Kansas Geological Survey serves all of Kansas. So we work with all of the different universities, and we work with folks all the way to the very southwest corner. So we do a lot of really cool stuff at the survey. A quick little bit about me. I'm a military brat. I've been everywhere, but I did my bachelor's in geology from James Madison University in 2009. I came here for my master's and my PhD. I did geophysics and geoarchaeology, 2012, 2017. Stayed for a postdoc in STEM education at KU. I'm really passionate about STEM education, and it opened up, and I just had a baby. So 2 years without going to do field work was a nice break. And then from there, I was really fortunate to get offered a job at the Kansas Geo Survey here. I'm an associate researcher and a science outreach manager, which means I have 12 different jobs. I do all the outreach for all 170 people at the survey. My primary audience is working with state legislators, which is actually pretty fun. I take them on a field trip every year, and we talk about natural resources and issues in the state. And the whole point of the KGS is that we're a neutral agency. So you don't have to deal with like the hot topics, right? You're just there to talk about, how did this happen? What are the facts? And how do we try and address them? I'm a mom to an amazing kiddo in Dago, and if you weren't here before, she's going to be in Matilda this weekend at the Lawrence Art Center, so get tickets. And next weekend. And then actually just last year, I'm now a managing member of an LLC that provides educational consulting. So that's fun. I get to travel a lot for that. So my research is pretty broad. My degrees are in geophysics and archaeology, and I very much love this component of my work. But I also do a lot with STEM education and outreach, and then where the LLC came from, I actually do a lot of more like on the social science side now too. And we've been working to actively develop strategies to improve workplace climate for scientists and anyone in the professional workplace. But in particular, it's like these two really come together. Anything that I do in geophysics or archaeology is about community work. And so since I've been here in Kansas and since I started at the KGS, I've been really interested in cemeteries. And my very first research project that I did as a senior in my undergrad year was I mapped a cemetery down in Virginia. And it was one where the river was cutting through. They'd been told that the graves had been moved, but we found otherwise. And it was really exciting. And I really honestly didn't know what I was doing. I was using this radar and like pretending like I knew what I was doing. But then I decided I actually wanted to learn what I was doing. So that's why I came to KU. So now that I have time to do this and I have all this fun equipment, I'm starting to work my way, and I've started focusing just in kind of like the northeast part of Kansas now. But starting this year, we're going to be moving down into southeast Kansas, and then my future goals are to actually start moving out west as well to understand burial patterns as people migrated into Kansas and as they moved west. And in particular, I'm interested in understanding how we can use cemeteries to understand how historically excluded communities were treated. So today we're going to talk about 4 different cemeteries. We're going to talk about Alma, Valencia, Ritchie, and Oak Hill. And so I'm going to start with Valencia because that's where the work started. But here we go. So Valencia Cemetery, I'm going to give a shout out right now to Madison Rice, who is now in med school at OSU. She's going to be a doctor. So proud of her. She did this project with me. This was her undergraduate honors thesis. And so we went out to Valencia Cemetery, which is in the town of Valencia. And here's a shot, an overview of the site here. So this was kind of like a really ideal site to start this work because what we have at the cemetery is we've got each of these little dots right here represents a headstone. So we've got a lot of different burials in pretty good condition. Up here, supposedly there's a potter's field. We didn't see much evidence of that though. There are just some burials. But then there's also very clear social stratification from east to west. The folks who were buried on the west were more wealthy. The folks who were buried on the east were less wealthy. I have some dates here for you too. Hold on. I'm really good at forgetting dates. So the oldest marked burial here is from 1868. It's been continuously used since then, even in this year. But it's important to note that this is a post-Civil War cemetery. And I only point that out because we're also interested in trying to understand the impact of like embalming and stuff like that, and how well preserved individuals' remains are. So yeah, we've got 153 years at the time we did this project. Age range from 0 to 103 years. It's actually about a 1-to-1 for men and women who are buried there. Although we don't know pretty much anything about the race or ethnicity at the cemetery. And we've got this interesting social stratification. So what Madison did for her research is she broke the entire cemetery up into 4 different quadrants. So we're going to focus right now on the west side. And just to try and look at some different factors. So in the northwest quadrant there, we had about 38 known burials with the headstones. And in the southwest quadrant, much busier, we had about 124. Average age of death for both was pretty similar. They were 59 and 52 years. And then the average age of burial was a little bit different. So we had some older burials in the southwest quadrant than in the northwest quadrant. And then in the northeast quadrant, again, this is where that supposedly that Potter's Field is. We had about 11 headstones there, but they were older, up to 100 years old. And then in the southeast quadrant, 63 burials, although I would probably be willing to put money down, although I'm not a gambler, that if we actually went out there and did a survey of just the open areas, that we would find some potential unmarked burials there. So similar average age of death across the board. So what Maddie's research objectives were, she was trying to really understand how the GPR data varies with age, at time of death, and age of burial, and see if we could actually make interpretations about the type of burial from the GPR data. And this was a prime setting because we know they're there. The headstones are there. We're not looking for unmarked burials. We have a control setting here. We had a hypothesis that infants and children, we probably wouldn't detect them as much because they're so much smaller, but then we were wrong. And then we thought that perhaps the difference in social stratification between the west and east side would give us differences in the GPR signature, more so because we were like, oh, maybe we'll see more like vaults and stuff like that on the west side because they can afford that, versus maybe they didn't have a coffin or a wooden box on the east side. So who here has heard of GPR before? The infamous lawnmower. That's Maddie right there. Seriously, I miss her. So when GPR first started being used, how GPR works, it's basically like your microwave, or it's like when you're listening to the radio. You're listening to the radio and you know it's coming from the radio tower, right? But you can't see the waves going back and forth in between because there are frequencies that are in our visible range. So a radar, a GPR ground computers, is doing the same thing. We've got 2 antennas down here at a set frequency. For here, it was at 200 megahertz. We've got a computer up here, and then we've got this fancy little doodad right here that takes the information from the antennas and translates it for the computer. Save it, keep going along. This is what some data looks like. And this is actually from some of the first work that was done using radar for looking for graves, so that's why I decided to show it. If you look at this for me like that, just doesn't look like anything. But to me, I'm like, look how much is there. So as a geophysicist, what we're looking for is these hyperbolas that you see coming here or over here. We're looking for these changes or these bright spots, which is telling us that there's something different buried in the soil. Could be a body, could be a rock, could be a buried headstone, could be a tree root, but something's different buried in the subsurface. And so that's as technical as I'm going to get on the radar, but feel free to ask me more technical questions.
So is that a lot of bodies there then?
Yes, this one is a lot of bodies, and I think this is what they're saying is potentially bodies on top of one another, or this indicates collapse. And that's where you're seeing kind of this dirt soil signature as well.
And so you're seeing from the top down, like from ground level to below ground level.
Yes, but so what's also interesting here, because this is kind of the first radar that came out, what I'm going to show you in some of my data is now when we're using radar, you would see this if you had pretty much just a body left, right? You hit like that skull and you get that diffraction. If I have a coffin, I'll actually see the top and bottom of the coffin because the air void inside is different. And then the vault really stands out because it's metal. And that metal is real different, so you get a real bright spot, and then you kind of see that difference there. So we can make some more interpretations about that today. This is a fun thing. I was like, hey, try and show people, like how many people were there based on how old they were when they died, so 0 to 105, versus how long they've been buried, from 0 to 150 years. And this is what we came up with as like the best way to try and portray this. So things that are yellow just means there was 1, 2 is green, 3 is blue, 4 is darker blue. But it's basically just trying to represent that there actually is a pretty good spread across the board. Fortunately, we don't have too many infants and children, but we definitely have some. But across the board, we've got good spread, and that's what I was hoping for, so I can try and test that hypothesis of, do we not pick up children as much as we do adults because of the size? So overall, we had 4 different types of characteristics that we observed at the cemetery. One of the first characteristics that we observed is something we call an edge definition. And so basically what I'm saying here is, one, you can actually kind of see the hyperbola shape, but here I'm seeing a top and a bottom. So edge definition is that this is probably a coffin, because we can see the top and bottom of it. This person was 68, and the burial was about 24 years old. The typical diffraction, high amplitude contrast, that was all over the place. So these nice little targets right here. This was an infant, right? So not even a year old. And this is someone who was 71 years old, but we're still getting the same type of signature. This one, it's called polarity reversal here. You can ignore that. This is where I think we have like a vault. So we get this really high color change, right? And then notice how it goes from like white, black to black, white, black. You get that switch in the order of the colors if you go from something to metal and then back, for example. So this would be a really nice example. And then that ringing that's going down, metal often does that. Metal and tree roots do. So this is where I think we have a nice vault. And it's only about 28 years old. So it makes sense. So we got these 4 different characteristics. Here's the other one. Then we would also, so this is where the trained eye gotta kind of come in, right? Because oftentimes we would also see, can you, right? Am I just making this up? You can see a hyperbole here, but it's really weak. That's still a target. And what I think we have here, and from my dissertation research, is that as the bone weathers down over time, and it starts to, look more like the soil around it, you just get a weaker response back because it's not as much change. So I still think we have a burial here, but it probably never was even in a coffin, and broke down more over time. This is fancy numbers. Basically, all I wanted to show you on this one is that we took ones that had those typical diffractions, those kind of higher amplitude typical diffractions, that was just a single burial. And we looked at it to say, do we see any correlations, whether it's age at death versus amplitude, or just how long the body's been buried with amplitude? No real strong correlations here, which is a good thing. It means that I did. We picked up pretty much all babies that were here, except for one, I think. So we can definitely pick up children and babies. And then even after 160 years, we can still pick up these burials over time. And so it gives us confidence that we don't have to assume that if a potter's field is 150 years old, we just won't see anything. So next I'm going to talk about Alma Cemetery, which actually these 2 are the reason that I ended up out there. So Alma Cemetery, I have the dates written over here. This one also has a real fun story about, and you might want to tell it, about someone who fell in a well and now it's haunted, correct?
I don't know.
You don't know. People go there at night because it's supposedly haunted. So we were fine. Okay, so the earliest recorded burial in Alma is 1872, but the cemetery wasn't actually officially laid out until 1900. It's divided into many sections: a Catholic section, a Lutheran section, a United Church of Christ section, and a public section. So the public, or the city section, has multiple subgroups, including a section for veterans, a potter's field, and a segregated section for African Americans, and that's basically also the Potter's Field. It's caught it all within Block 12. And so that's what this is showing you here. This is.
Wait. Why do you say it's segregated?
That was what I had in my notes here. Block 12, but I think what they actually meant was it's the Potter's Field.
No, evidence going through the records won't support that. I don't think.
Okay.
What it was is there were huge families, and so there are more black people there than white, but it's because the family plots, because there are black people throughout the rest of the cemetery.
So with outside of Block 12?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Like 4 in the second row, 4 number 20, and 21
4.
and 16 and
4, there you go.
and 19.
So that's good.
The famous-
I did that.
The famous George Washington Owens from K-State,
Yes.
the first black graduate, his mother's buried in section 4, and his father's in the Potter's Field.
Can everyone online here? Do I need to repeat?
You might want to repeat the
Ah.
standout points.
So so it is not segregated. There are a lot. It's section 4, section 20, and another one you said. I forgot which one.
4 and 7 and 9.
And 9 and 12. So we definitely we have African American burials all throughout the cemetery. But in the Potter's Field, do we think?
No, it's got white people.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me. So I want to talk quickly about what is a Potter's Field. Has anyone here ever heard of a Potter's Field before?
Mhm.
Okay, so maybe but for online, I'll just go through the definitions that I had here. Potter's Fields aren't talked about as much, and often when they are, it's as if they are a relic of the past, but they do still exist today. The term Potter's Field comes from the Bible, in which some high priest bought a clay field with the money Judas had received for identifying Jesus. The clay field had been used by potters to collect clay, hence the name. And this original Potter's Field was for the burial of the poor and unknown. Potter's Field has become the colloquial term for what is also called a pauper or indigent burial grounds. So they can exist within cemeteries like at Oak Hill or here at Alma, like I'm going to show you. And they can also exist on their own, isolated from any cemetery, such as Hart Island. Hart Island is the largest Potter's Field in the world and is in New York City. Still receives thousands of burials a year, and pretty sure it got a lot more recently, right after the COVID global pandemic. And so a Potter's Field is often where those who cannot afford a cemetery plot are buried. They often get buried in unmarked graves and often hidden away in a far corner of the cemetery, most often in the northeast portion of a cemetery, because that's where you get the least amount of light. So these fields often look like empty open spaces, but they're far from it. And so I'm now focused on these because I think it's really important that we I get a lot of requests to come out to a cemetery and try and find one person's a family member's grave and stuff like that. But I'm but then we're just telling, and not that I wouldn't do that, but it's then we're telling the same stories. I want to figure out the stories of the folks whose stories haven't been told. So it ultimately takes a combination of my research, geophysics, and then a lot of historical research, which I'm learning how to do because I was not trained on that. We get in there. So at Alma, one of the reasons they had me come out is they just rebuilt. How long did that take to rebuild the wall?
3 years. 4 workshops.
A lot of workshops. They built a brand new wall around. It's a stone wall, right? So when I say wall, I mean a beautiful stone wall. And then, so I came out there to try and figure out where folks were buried. And then I was also looking at section 12 to see the headstones are there because I think you all were replacing some of the headstones, right? So we wanted to make sure that people were there as well. It's been a while now, so now I'm trying to remember why I was there.
There are 87 unmarked graves, and we put markers on all of them.
Yes, they've been doing amazing work at this one. So Madison helped me on this one as well. We went out and this was kind of our survey area here. And so we were working to try and figure out if anyone was buried here. These stars represent where we had some veteran headstones still remaining, but they didn't know if anyone was actually buried there. And so I'm going to show you, actually, let me go to this one first. So Maddie was able to, and you're only getting a cutoff of this. I need to give you the full length of the cemetery. Just couldn't fit it all on here. Maddie was able to go through block 12 and the Potter's Field and either say, definitively with green, yes, we have a buried target there. Blue meaning probably, but it's not as clear. And then red means that someone is supposed to be buried there, but we don't have a target. But to be fair, it doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that maybe the GPR didn't pick it up for some other different reason, right? So it really doesn't mean they're not there. And then she starred places where we have what looks like burial targets that aren't recorded, so potential unmarked burials. So we have this across the board. And then in the Potter's Fields, we had some records of people who were there, but the data kind of blew me away because when we're coming here, right, we got like nice spacing, a couple feet in between the different markers and stuff like that. Now, mind you, this is like a 30-meter long line, but just like bam, 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 bam. And they're like 2-3 feet apart. So they're definitely there. They all have the same type of target, which tells me that they probably weren't buried in a coffin. If they were, it was a wooden box that's decayed since then, so all we have left is the burial remains. They're very shallow. Mind you, all burials I've found in all of these cemeteries have been very shallow.
Like how shallow?
Like 3 feet, if even that. But when I talk about Richie, bedrock, depth of bedrock at that cemetery is not even a meter, which is 3 feet. So unless they were digging through bedrock, it'd be pretty difficult. And you think back to the time, this is the 1800s. They didn't have the same equipment we have, and this is clay that we're usually digging through in Kansas. That's difficult. So I'm not surprised that they're shallow, but I think whenever I tell someone that, they're like, "What?" I'm like, "No, they're never 6 feet deep." But so clear difference in the treatment too. We don't see any evidence of coffins, and just in the fact that they're so closely spaced together just tells me that there was different treatment in that field as well. So we looked at the two cemeteries together, and total number of burial targets analyzed between the two, over 200 at Valencia, over 100 at Alma, and across the board, pretty high detection rates. So again, telling us that the radar does work well at this. Should bring up that radar just doesn't work as well in clay. Clay really attenuates the signal, and that's why I was really trying to be like, can I even use this method in the future to try and do this work? But yeah, high detection rates. Also a good chunk that we were like maybe, and then some that we didn't pick up. And then the ones that exhibited in particular that diffraction, that hyperbole characteristic, almost half across both. So again, kind of looking back at the age, I really start to question how many people are actually buried in nice coffins that last that long, as opposed to maybe some like pine boxes that have definitely decayed over time and maybe aren't there anymore. Less that exhibit that like vault structure, that high polarity reversal. What if they did? They were definitely more recent. So from those two cemeteries with those headstones, we have 4 distinct characteristics we observed. Age of death does not seem to be a major influence on GPR detection capabilities, which was a good thing. And then again, burials are very shallow, which surprises everyone. So let's move on to Ritchie Cemetery. I am going to bring this one up. So Bob's the reason that I came up to Ritchie Cemetery. This was a project through the Kansas Historical Society, which received funding from the National Park Service. I want to make sure I give credit to where the funding came from. Anyone here familiar with Ritchie Cemetery? Probably some of you more than me. Ritchie Cemetery was initially called South Topeka Cemetery. It was originally founded in 1859. First known burials belonged to children of white Free State settlers. However, after the Exodus or migration of 1879, the burials within the cemetery were predominantly Black families and individuals. It was renamed Ritchie Cemetery in the 1880s in honor of John Ritchie, who was a well-known abolitionist and Free Stater. A total of 302 people are currently documented as being buried at the site. However, this number may change because the wonderful folks who are doing work on this are still doing the historical research and potentially finding some more names. Additionally, 12 of these burials have also been documented as being reinterred at a different cemetery. So the documented burial dates range from 1859 through 1941, with 85% of the burials occurring over a 30-year period from 1890 to 1919. So that was the intense use of time. Of the known burials, over 90% were Black individuals and over 30% are children under the age of 10 years old. Now, when you go out to the site today, there's, 4 headstones left?
There's about 7.
7, not including the markers, the memorial markers in the middle.
Some are just fallen flat, one's buried.
So not much evidence of any headstones today. And someone can correct me if this is wrong, but while I was collecting data out there, I had someone come up on site abruptly, but then was telling me about how they grew up around there and how there used to be more headstones and that they had disappeared over time. And they told me that like they were convinced that the grocery store during Halloween one year, they're convinced that they saw the headstones got stolen, and they were convinced that they saw them there like at the beer display after that. So people have not respected this space since that time. It is now on the National Historic Registry. So it is a kind of protected site. Is that the way to describe it? Assuming that lasts.
It's eligible for grants.
It's eligible for grants.
And it has the status that it's important.
Yes. So my task was to come out here and what can we learn, right? Like, do we see evidence of burials here? We had 300 documented. This was a challenging site for me to even try. There are trees everywhere. Trees are terrible for radar because they go everywhere. And their signatures, the tree root signatures will overpower anything around them because they're just really bright features that show up. And then when trees die, their roots stay, right? So for however long. So it's hard to differentiate what's going on there. And then I also have just a lot of urban noise, power lines and stuff like that. So we did the best that we could. And I think we got some pretty cool results. But just know with that caveat, this was a harder site. And before I go any further, you should go check out the website, Ritchie Cemetery Project. Just type in Ritchie Cemetery Project online. And Jan and dang it.
That guy.
That
We
guy.
both blanked out. Jeff
Thank you.
Hansen.
Jeff Hansen.
Jan and Jeff have put so much hard work into this website. They talk about the people that are there, the history. They have these really cute blogs that they post and stuff like that. They've been doing a lot with the plant life that's happening there. So please check out this site and give them some love because just wonderful folks doing some wonderful stuff. So I took a different student out to this one. And we broke up the cemetery into, I always use if you always see numbers, I break everything up into 20 by 20 meter grids. That's how I function in life. So I split this up into grids. I had about 21 total. Right here is just showing you where there was a path coming in. So we expected that to change some of the data. Up here, we had an old foundation pad. And then over here was really interesting because there appeared to be like a stone ring. And then we found shells and some other kind of interesting stuff. So I wondered if there's something up there. Ironically, I couldn't get the radar up there, sorry, because of all that material on the ground, but I was able to use a different instrument that I'll show you in a second. Whoops, as I burp. So the other instrument, I brought something out that measures the magnetic field. So there's different ways to measure the magnetic fields. This one that I use, it actually uses the same technology as radar. It uses those radio waves, but it's able to break apart the electromagnetic field and look at the electrical component, the conductivity, and then measure the magnetic component. And so it's kind of a hot mess of colors because the power lines really impeded the signal and just kind of overpowered stuff. But what was interesting to me is that over where we had those circular areas, I actually see some circular features in some of these areas, particularly where I couldn't really get the radar. And over here, there's so many trees, but I'm like, maybe we actually had some like particular family burials in these kind of concentrated stony areas. So that was one interesting finding. And then with the radar, it was hard to interpret. But pretty much the only characteristic that I saw were the diffractions. And it was either a weak diffraction or it was a slightly higher amplitude diffraction. Sometimes they looked a little more linear like that, but that one right there could have been more of a buried headstone because of just how shallow it is. But I went through every single one of these lines and looked for patterns. So where do I see diffractions that are noticeable? And then where do I see them connect, right? So from line to line, I collected lines every 1.5 feet. So if two lines were next to each other and I saw two targets connect, gave me more confidence that there was something, that it wasn't just a rock or a bump in the ground. The reason it's red and blue is because I was just marking something that was more shallow versus more deep or deeper. Here is a really great example of a line where there's a tree. There's a tree at about 11 meters, and then there's a tree at about 18.5 meters. So nowhere in this line that I feel confident interpreting anything, because those tree roots, this is exactly what they look like. Higher in amplitude, and they just mask out anything that's around them. And then honestly, y'all, the majority, at least half of this cemetery is covered in trees at this point. So I'm sure that there are potential unmarked burials that I couldn't analyze. So this is the final map we produced. So we've got these represent trees, the brown boxes. And then the headstones that were still remaining were mostly down here. There was one up here and one tucked away in the trees over here. These were those memorial markers for the veterans. Blue is a burial target that was more shallow. Red is a burial target that was a little bit deeper. And so lots of potential targets here that were connected. And in particular, a lot that appeared to be oriented east-west, but at the same time, a lot that were north-south. Doesn't mean, so there could have been like two targets here, and I just made the interpretation that they were close enough, and I'm going to say that in this area, there's a target. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're facing that direction. But you can see, like in grids like this, I have almost no interpretation, because I set a radius around every tree that I wouldn't classify anything, because it was too much bias in there. But hopefully this will be helpful for the Historical Society and other groups in the future to think about if they wanted to use other non-invasive ways of trying to explore and see if there are burial targets around here, or as evidence if someone ever wants to come in and try and build something around here. This, I hope, would serve as evidence to be like, there are clearly targets here, so we need to leave them alone.
What geophysical technique would you recommend outside of radar for this particular site?
And because of how shallow they were, I think I would recommend electrical resistivity. Fancy name, pokey poke, where you've got, we call this pokey poke. You got two metal stakes, and they only go like an inch into the ground. You got two metal stakes on a mobile rod, and then you got two that are stuck into the ground further away, like 20 meters away. And you move it along, and as you move it along, it sends an electrical current into the ground. And what that does is we can then measure how resistive the subsurface is. So we can see if there's changes between clay and gravel or stone and bone and stuff like that. So I would recommend this one to see if we could get some better delineation of what those targets were. Rock and bone have similar characteristics. However, bone loves water. And as long as there's some water saturation in the soil, which there is, right, it soaks into that water. So its properties should be distinct enough, in my opinion, to kind of try and tease those out. But that takes a lot longer to collect data. So we need time. Okay. Takes us now, I took what I learned from Richie, and then we came to Oak Hill. And this conversation started with that lovely gentleman right over there in 2020, right before the pandemic started, or was it during the pandemic? I don't know. It was just before. So then it got delayed, obviously, a good year.
Who is the lovely gentleman?
This is Carrie. Everybody say hi to Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Karen.
So he came and talked to me about this project, and I'm really glad you did, because I'm learning a lot, in particular from this project as well. And what we call it is the Oak Hill Cemetery at Pottersfield Community Remembrance Project. It has been funded. I want to point this out. The Douglas County Heritage Conservation Council funded $13,000, and Humanities Kansas also gave us $10,000 to work towards this project. So huge thanks to those folks. But really, how it started with the NAACP chapter here in Lawrence. They were commemorating, right, the anniversary of. It's weird to say that, but like the anniversary of the lynching. So 3 Black men were lynched here for horrific reasons. And so as a part of outreach and education about this project, we wanted to know where they were buried in Oak Hill. The only information we had was pretty much nothing until during the pandemic, someone found in a bathroom an old blue plat map that was supposed to be of the Potter's Field. That's on my next slide. This is what we found, the blue map. So it's kind of hard to interpret. There's about 300 names listed on it. So everything down here, all those little scribbles, so each of these little things is an individual lot. And based on our measurements, it seemed like the lots were only about 2 feet wide and maybe 4 or 6 feet deep or 6 feet long. Stacked really close together, some names written in here. And in particular, we do have one headstone out there, which is Moses. And so Carrie likes to say that Moses led the way. So Moses' name is on here. So it kind of gave us some confidence, like, okay, on this plat map, we have Moses, and then we can see, for example, Pete Vinegar. His name is listed on here. So maybe we can actually figure out if they're buried there. Now, some things to take note about this map. We don't know, we haven't figured out yet who the author is. I think it says Henderson, CE, which I think would be a civil engineer. But Caleb and I have tried to do some work to figure out who that person is, and we haven't found anything yet. There's no scale, and there's a lot of like random X's and stuff like that with no key, so it's kind of hard to tell what's going on here, but it was a start. So based on Moses' location, we decided to do a bunch of different techniques here. And I had some super amazing community volunteers who I just cannot thank enough. It was like a 3-week project, and they dealt with the heat. Y'all got me a porta potty, which was clutch. And so we didn't have to worry about that. And they came out and collected data every day. It was truly a wonderful project. We did, so this is that instrument I was telling you that collects both the electric field and magnetic field. It's called the GEM 2. It looks like a ski, and you just hold it and walk along. There's our infamous radar. By the way, her nickname is RBG. And this is the Pokey Poke. We did the Pokey Poke as well. And then so we set up about 10 grids at the site, and I'll show you next. Based on, so the white is the boundary of our geophysics grid, okay? The red is what we kind of interpret as potentially the boundaries from that plat map based on where Moses' location was. And so and we did that after the fact, so that I was like, oh, well, I was a couple feet off on the bottom, but that's okay. So this one I believe right here is Moses, right here. And his headstone is really unique, y'all. You should really check it out. It is concrete, and it's got shells encased within it. I think he used to have some glass, which is actually a really common tradition, a burial tradition for the Black community. So I think it's just so cool that that one still is there and has been maintained this long. But there's, 3 or 4-ish other headstones. At least one of them is broken and fallen over. There are 2 headstones down here by the tree, but they are really new. So I think at some point some family members came back recently and put in these new headstones in what they thought was around that spot. And then in our work, we actually uncovered another one of Sarah Birch. That was the photo on the header for this. So while we were doing Pokey Poke, I was walking with Denise. She cracks me up. And I hit something, and I was like, what is that? And she just gets down and starts digging. And I was like, oh, Denise! But she immediately it was just a little bit of grass. And then the headstone was right there from 1890, perfectly preserved. I think the only reason it got perfectly preserved is because it had fallen over at some point and no one had picked it up. So we found Sarah's headstone. And we think she was around there, but I don't know. It could have traveled farther than I realized. So there's our grid. there's where we think the plat map is. And so let's look at some data. So here's the resistivity data. Pretty simple data here. Grays, meaning that lower resistance, right? It's more conductive, so probably more of like a clayey soil. And then we get into some higher resistance values up here. And this is actually more so influenced by the geology. That's the bedrock. We got limestones and sandstone stuff underneath. So this was pretty consistent with what I already knew about the site. So I always, whenever I'm doing a survey, I go to the National Resources Conservation Service. They have a web soil survey. It'll give you a whole bunch of information about what types of soils are there so that I can always confirm that it's clay that I'm dealing with. But then it'll tell you what's the depth of bedrock. That's really important when we're talking about grave sites. So this right here is where the potter's field is. Yellow right here corresponds to the Sibleyville complex. Orange on the north side corresponds to the Basemore complex. Average depth to bedrock, 30 centimeters and 70 centimeters. So if they were burying folks here, it was shallow. And that's not different than the other cemeteries I'm working at. So the average depth of the resistivity instrument is 0.5 meter, 50 centimeters. So what we're seeing is that once we're going up here at 50 centimeters, we're already into that bedrock because it's really shallow. Then we get a little bit deeper, we got a little bit more soil, but still really shallow. Okay. The magnetic data was really interesting. So I know I put it in rainbow colors because I think it's pretty that way. But it's just we're just ranging from 0 to 20, which is just showing us change in magnetic data. But super interesting is, again, tell me if you see it, there's rows. There's definite rows, and I count like anywhere between 10 and 12, depending on the day and how awake I am. This one, I don't know if it's real. It's so close to the trees that I personally feel like is probably noise, or someone buried something back there that's more like just a long piece of metal. So I personally don't believe that one. But everything in here, you would get those like bright spots if someone had been buried in their clothes, had buttons, if there was nails and coffins. Any of those could contribute to the magnetic values being slightly different here. So this was really exciting because it was like clearly we have a concentrated area of activity, at least in the middle of the grid here. That's the majority of what I've shown people until today. So the GPR data, I have shown people this. So some promising results. Now please do ignore that this is not the accurate depth on the side of this. This is where Moses' burial is, right here. And so where this what the little red triangle is. So promising to see that when we go by Moses' burial, we see targets. I don't know why we see two. Could be that they were so close together, or maybe more than one burial in that space. We see it across a couple different lines, and then interestingly, we see other targets near Moses. Some of the other headstones that are there, this was on the east side of a baby and a 9-year-old. So one of them, we got a pretty clear signal away from the headstones. And then one right here, I was like, maybe I still see remnants of a target there. And then J.W. Dolan was one of the only other headstones that we could read. I see a target there. Elizabeth Ashley and Mary Jane, they're right next to that tree. I will never know. I will never be able to tell you if they're there, because look at that tree signature. It's just bonkers. So what we did the past 2 years is we've gone line by line and looked at the data and tried to interpret if we saw any targets. So here's the very first grid, very first line. Pretty quiet. That's a pretty clean line right there. Whereas we would move just 16 meters over, I got a whole bunch of targets that I'm now working through. And then I realized pretty quickly that I had to kind of distrust anything along the side, and I set myself a barrier because we were just so close to those trees, and I have seen tree roots that extend 10 meters. So once again, I kind of set myself a wall where I didn't try to make any interpretations. Hi! Here's where we're at so far. It's a lot of colors. It's going to be way better in the future. And I have to give tons of props to Isla, who's been tirelessly working through this for me. She is an incredible human being and starting her PhD with us in the fall. So we have gone through every single line and we have identified everywhere where there is a target. I have not finished these 2 grids yet, and it's because I'm having a really hard time because of the geology. I can see that bedrock sloping in, but I have to basically piece it together and then see how close I am to the trees that were there, and I just have less confidence up here. But everywhere that is marked right now, with the exception of the gray, because that's where the trees were, everywhere there is a target, a potential target. If it's marked in yellow, it just means that it was shallower, so more like 20 centimeters below the ground. And if it's in blue, it was a little bit deeper, more like 30 centimeters, 40 centimeters below ground. Red is actually, they were super shallow, super high amplitude, and often just look like squares at the top. And I think that there's more buried headstones out there. I really think, and this one in particular, I'm kind of wondering if there's like a concrete base or something like right there, because it is connected all the way across, which would be really cool. And those ones, I think we should go out and like poke around personally, just to see if we see the headstones. But so lots of areas where we think we have some potential buried headstones. And then other ones, we call them other because it was a different characteristic than the 4 other signatures that I've seen, but I still think it's a potential target. So I wanted to add that as to my database. So how we're going to do this is we're going to take this map. We're going to basically make a concentration map with one color and then be able to piece it out for you all, like individually, like shallow versus deep. But there's more than 300 graves in this potter's fields. And we now can support that. So the other individual who's been a huge part of this project is Caleb Lattice. Caleb works for me at the KGS now. He has gone through all 5 original cemetery books. These are huge volumes, line by line. And we've identified 1,109 names of folks who were buried in this potter's fields. He has brought in, if it was identified in the cemetery records, we now know their name, their sex, their race, their place of birth, date of birth and date of death, or estimated age. We also have other information about like where they died, how they died, and stuff like that. That's in the main part of the database. What we're going to be putting up on this story map that we're making as a final product is this. And then if people want more information, we're ultimately going to be giving this to Watkins to take care of. And so you get to handle all those requests. But I'm really hopeful that perhaps folks can go in there and find family names and see, like, confirm, like, this is where it says that they were born. We're going to do more historical research to go into the census records to try and see when they came to Lawrence and get some more information that way, or maybe even at some point identify descendants. But so Caleb, and there's more research to do from there. The prices are always a little bit different about how some families paid. So it seems like sometimes a family might pay for the city to create the burial, but a lot of the times it seems like they did the burial themselves. It seems like they got charged for a casket, but I don't think they actually got a casket. And we found some other stories where that was pretty clear. Like there was like scandals of undertakers charging for things that they didn't actually do. We have a common set of undertakers here, so we want to do more historical research into just who those were and see if maybe their records are archived somewhere that we can get a hold of. So there's so much work still to be done from this project. And so,
Larry,
yes,
before you leave the burial records,
I'm going to pull the whole thing up if you want to see the bigger one.
actually, I'm fascinated by the immigrant. But these 5 books, do the 5 books all come from one date, or, you know, is one like 1880, one was done in 1900?
Yeah, it was just continuous record keeping.
It was
So
just continuous record keeping.
yeah.
So what we're looking at right here, what's the date of that particular book?
I think right here, when I took a screenshot of this, he was transferring stuff over. So right now it's actually organized based or sorted based off sex and race.
Okay.
So it's not by book in this
Okay.
particular one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there's a lot of Swedish.
Yeah.
Swedish.
But you're only seeing like just 20 columns right now out of 1,000 too. So
So in that particular area that you picked there, there's quite a few immigrants from
Mhm.
like Sweden and Germany in there as well.
Yeah,
Here, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
A couple of questions.
Yeah.
Where were these books?
So the city of Lawrence has them. We had to request permission, and they had actually scanned them. So they were able to get us the scanned copies of the volumes that we kept and then went through line by
So
line.
the city has the original books?
Yes, city has the original books. We actually found we found some of the cards on familysearch.org. And then we've then found more cards archived somewhere else. But it was very clear that someone had gone potentially to the records books and then tried to transcribe those onto that. So there was quickly getting like a phone trail of misinformation, which is why Caleb then went back to the original source. And he had stopped at like volume 4, because supposedly people weren't buried in the Potter's Field after a certain date. I can't remember which one right now. But so he took the time to go through volume 5 and we found more people in there. So much to tell from that.
What's the date on Moses' headstone?
18, do you remember? 1895.
Okay.
It was like definitely late 1800s. You can barely see it etched into it today.
And if you go out to the cemetery, how would I know this is Potter's Field? Is it identified somehow?
No, well, no, I take that back. They now have the 4 cornerstones, which we think I gave them the best guess I could, based on this about where I thought the edges of the Potter's Field was. But yes, there are now 4 cornerstones. It is in the northeast part up there. I'll go back a slide at the beginning of this and show you exactly where it is. But yeah, you now can see it, and we're hopeful to get signs up there one day with some of these interpretations and maybe people's stories that we'll put up there as well. But I wanted to show you quickly one of the final products that we're hoping to use here. So here's the database. This is the kind of cleaned up version, and you can see we are missing a lot of sex and race information for many of the folks, but then we do start to fill it in. We are only using the language that was put on the records, and so I don't know what they meant by colored. I got to be completely honest. That could mean a couple different things, right? So we have to work with the information that we had. The full database, not to scare you, I think it's here. Yeah, so we also have cause of death, we have the plot number, we have who the undertaker is, and I think this is where I have to talk to Carrie to kind of disappoint him, I think, because in the end, that plat map, a lot of the lots were like where people were written doesn't match up with what we were finding in the cemetery records. The plat map itself is missing a whole 250 lots right in the middle of it. We don't know why. And so I don't have enough confidence in that map at this point to say that where it says that P. Vinegar and them is actually where they are. But we know that they're there because we can see the activity that's in there. I just can't, with my radar, I could never tell you where an individual is. I could just say someone is probably here.
What is that, the blue map found? And there's got to be a little more story to that.
Tell them the blue map story.
It was found, someone in the city just came across it in a closet or something.
No, it was a bathroom.
Well, now it's stored in that. The South Park,
Gazebo?
not the recreation center, that little building in South Park.
Yeah.
The bathrooms have been decommissioned, but there's storage.
So there's storage in the South Park gazebo,
Come here.
and they found it there. So okay, this is one of the final products, and it is definitely in beta mode right now. Okay, seriously, I'm learning how to do story maps, so show me some grace. And my wonderful student Allie, great students, has helped me to build this too. But we're going to turn this into a story map. And so the story map is going to have a lot of different information available about the history of the site, the history of Oak Hill. So speaking of where it is, when you drive into Oak Hill from here, it's right up there in the northeast corner. And then it's going to have pictures, probably different than this, pictures of the headstones that we have there today. There's Moses' headstone that is still out there and cared for today. There are 7 headstones of soldiers buried. They're adjacent, so to the south of the Potter's Field, and I don't think that's actually in the Potter's Field. And then you go down here, and it starts to go into some things about the geophysics. So you all can, I needed to show this off because here's some photos of those amazing volunteers. and their names, because serious props to all of these volunteers. Talks about how the geophysics works. I have videos too. Look, it's cute. I was really excited about that. I had one where they were like doing the processional, but my voice sounded too weird and I couldn't do it. We'll have the results in there for you now. So I have a good chunk of the results in there, but then I'll add all of this information about the GPR that I just showed you. And then Caleb is adding all of his part about particularly about his interpretation. His thesis, his master's thesis was on this project. So we're pulling a lot from his thesis. We'll have the Pottersfield database link there. And then we'll have a link to his thesis that you all can pull from our information too. So this is going to be one of the final products of this project. So I am more than happy to take questions. Before I do, I got to give one quick plug. One of the reasons I wanted to come give a talk today is that it is now One Day 1KU. This is a fundraising event for the University of Kansas. It started at noon today and it goes through noon tomorrow. And so if you were interested, and there's no pressure whatsoever, we are fundraising at the KGS for my education group. We make toolkits that are matched to the science standards for teachers across the state of Kansas about water, about natural hazards, about all sorts of stuff that we give them for free. And we can't do that without generous donations. So if you would be interested in giving to the KGS, please check out the site. You can scan that QR code. But we appreciate any and all help to get that stuff. Cool. Questions? Yay!
You're talking about Moses, and that's sort of the segue to a very quick question that I have. I trust that you're familiar with the B'nai Israel Cemetery in Eudora.
We're starting there this spring.
I was going to ask if you were okay. I used to be on a committee that oversaw that cemetery, so I'm glad to know that.
I'm actually really excited with that one. We're both looking at the to try and find the burials, but also their ceremony where they bury the books. We're also going to see if we can find where those books were buried, which I think is just going to be really awesome.
Could you repeat the name of the cemetery for the?
Benny Israel is the name of the cemetery. I wanted to make sure I said Benny right. I got nervous for a second that I would say it wrong. We're actively collecting data right now at Osage City in their Pottersfield, so getting a little more west, and then we should be starting down in Parsons, Kansas, closer to the summer. They have a massive Pottersfield there, but like Oak Hill, lots of records. And so I'm really interested to compare these two cemeteries that actually are like both the same eastern portion, but occupied at slightly different times. So that'll be an interesting comparison. Yes.
What were you hoping to find about the 3 children who were lynched, and did you ever find any?
Could you repeat the question for people at home?
What were we hoping to find about the 3 men who were lynched, and what was the rest of it?
And did you find any?
Did we find any information? For me, and I had told them from the start, with geophysics and with the age of these burials, I could never say this is definitely a human versus, again, this is potentially just a buried rock or a really deep buried headstone. What I really wanted to show is that this the extents of the Pottersfield, so that if we wanted to make some memorial markers and stuff like that, we could say with more certainty, they are definitely here somewhere, and we memorialize them in that way. But I also am careful in my work in that I do work to also identify unmarked graves so that people don't mess with them. And that's really important when we think about like Native American burials and stuff like that. So we'll go out to try and identify them and keep those sites secret and protected so that people don't. So I always have 2 different things. But yeah, I was really just hoping to say, yes, there's people here. And I can't tell you exactly where they were, but I think we've pretty confidently confirmed that they are there.
I just want to make sure that you heard him say that he was there when they buried the books.
No, I
the
didn't.
Cemetery. So I think that's a very important resource for
Yeah.
you to realize.
Yes, let's talk.
Yeah, maybe I can get your contact information.
Absolutely.
Sign him up.
I know. So when we do this, I think, let me double check that we had gotten that permission. But we always, like at Osage, volunteers are coming out right now to help us collect that data. So we want these to be community projects. And so if you wanted to come out also and kind of say like, here's where it should be, it's very helpful for me in my work. So let's chat after this. Oh, I have 2 hands. That one first and then up here.
Did you find Pete Vinegar's name in the record book?
Yes, all 3 are definitely in the records book. So yeah, feel confident that they're there. It's just exactly where I don't know.
So you've done some Native American areas,
Yes,
but it's kept secret of where those are?
yes.
Like in Oak Hill, or you can say that or not?
No, across the state.
Oh, across.
Yeah, across the state. I saw it. Was it your hand? Yes.
Have you heard of the Brumballs Cemetery?
No.
It's just outside of Stony Point, Vinland. So,
Okay.
Baldwin, in the Baldwin cemeteries, they've done a great job of upkeep of their cemeteries, number one, and a lot of documentation. And Vinland just recently released an article that amazed me, and it talked about colored people and how well they were treated in those particular areas during this time period that, these late 1800s.
Yep.
And I was very thrilled to see, how well it talked about them. And there wasn't from the articles in this Brumball Cemetery, just outside of Vinland that there wasn't any separation at all.
Yeah.
That they were just buried right in and treated very well.
Yeah.
And were outstanding citizens. A lot of them sent their children here to KU. It was pretty interesting. Another question on the machine.
Yes.
Is that something that is only able to be held in your guys' hands, or is that something that people can like rent out or say get a day and have you guys come out and help use it, the radar machine?
Yeah, so you can rent them from companies, probably like $1,000 to a couple thousand a day.
Expensive stuff. Huh?
So I can't give you mine. However, I am always willing to try and work with different communities. All these projects that I do are pretty much free.
Yeah.
I never charge for my time. If I do charge anything, it's to pay my students because they're already in poverty and they need money.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to make them come out and do free labor. But reach out to me because I am interested in trying to help. Just know that it could be like, I'm going to be like, it's going to be in a year because I have so many people reaching out, but I'm more than happy to do that. I was going to bring up Eudora. We have scanned Southwest Cemetery, and Southwest Cemetery was the segregated cemetery there, where again they intentionally moved families, white families, to the New City Cemetery. But what I love about the Eudora one is that it didn't matter, like the Black community that was their cemetery, and they chose to be buried there, right? Like they chose to not be buried in the cemetery and come back to Southwest. And so that's next on the list is we've got all the data. Got to sit down and do the interpretation, which will take me a while, but I'm really excited to kind of show that because I think there's a lot of unmarked burials there. There's a headstone that we found inside of a tree. I'm so serious. The tree like grew around the headstone and the tree fell over and we found it. And if you go to the Eudora History Museum, Ben is what's the title? Director.
Yeah.
Ben is the director there, and they just recently put up an exhibit about some of that work that Grace, my student, did for that one. And I'm really excited to get to this part with that cemetery too, because I think about and I think about Richie too. They chose to be there. That was their space. And I think that's really cool. And the folks at Southwest, they were wealthy individuals, but they wanted to make sure that they were there. And I think that those stories are really important and need to be told too. So I want to hear more about this other cemetery too, and like kind of evaluate those together.
Vinland has on Facebook. I don't know if you Facebook, but you can just look it up by Vinland, or I can send it to you. It's a wonderful article.
I do Facebook.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm not too young to Facebook. I came on it when it first came out. Okay, I had hands. I had your hand, and then I'll get to you.
You may have said, I'm sorry if you already said this, Blair, but in terms of the Oak Hill Potter's Field, were the African Americans buried there, segregated in a certain section, or is it all mixed?
All mixed.
All mixed, okay.
And we have a lot of obituaries we want to go through. And the NAACP project has already been working on identifying obituaries for any Black individuals. And so we want to fill in that gap because some of the folks that are in there like don't have names. And we think that they were traveling, they died, no one knew who they were, didn't have fun, so they get put in the Potter's Field too, right? So it's definitely a mix. There. And we have records, and I meant to say this, y'all, we have the record books say one of those graves has 4 people who burned in a fire, all in one grave. In Caleb's thesis, there's a woman there who had like 6 children. I think some of them are stillbirths, and she only got buried with one of them, and the other ones are elsewhere in the cemetery. And just stories that need to be told, right? Like people didn't get to be with their families. But we think that there's probably a lot of instances where multiple people got buried in one plot. Yeah. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
First one, looking at your maps of what you found, there do seem to be incredibly straight roads. Have you talked to cemetery people about their techniques for measuring how they put somebody where they put them?
I have not, and so it's been on my to-do list to go visit like funeral homes and just talk to the folks that work there and see what kind of old records they have to better understand that. But that's why I want to get a hold of those undertakers.
Yeah.
I want to find these undertakers records because I think we might get a lot from there, and then just continue to look through what's in the archive through the city of Lawrence, the city records, and like we could probably understand a lot just by looking at the blueprints of Oak Hill itself and how they constructed that. Because basically what I see, the 2 common things I've seen in the Potter's Field is that they're all oriented the same-ish way, but they're just much smaller. They really cram them together.
Shoulder.
Yeah, but those are, I need more students who want to do those projects. I'm partnering, working with, hopefully starting going forward, Jonathan Hagel in the history department, and he wants to recruit students who can start answering these questions for us too.
Okay, second
Yes.
question. The Dunlap Cemetery in Morse County, are you doing is that on your list?
Not on my list.
That's another.
I need to just make a Google form that says like add the cemetery and like your contact information so that I can capture these, because I get them at these a lot, but then I'm not writing them down.
It's still called, and and next Saturday or Sunday in Council Grove, they're having a benefit for the Dunlap Colored Cemetery. And they actually, we interviewed people 20, 30 years ago, and they chose to have their own cemetery. They weren't segregated.
Yeah.
They chose, because that whole community was a Black community at one time.
Yeah. Okay, I will check. I mean, Rachel's got a performance at 2, but I'll see if I can sneak away.
I don't think so.
To go see that. Yes.
This is a little off,
That's
not
okay.
exactly on top. But, the increasing popularity of cremation, what does that do to all this work? I mean, there's even if these remains are interred, there's nothing to look for.
If they're in an urn, we could urn would be a beautiful thing to pick up. But yeah, no, if they're just cremated remains, there's nothing to see except if it's a very recent interment, then we would see the disturbed soil. We can see that disturbed soil signature probably like maybe 20, I'm gonna totally ballpark this, like 20 years until the soil gets compacted again and homogeneous. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm over here like, I'm gonna get composted. I don't want to take up space. Like compost me, make me a tree. It's gonna be great. I've learned to not be scared of death when I work in cemeteries, so it's great. You need something to help you get over that.
This is a question, but I heard a few years ago, we lived in Olathe, near the Olathe Cemetery, and that there's a Potter's Field over the northeast section. And I don't know how they did some research a little while back, but actually the Potter's Field is now underneath part of a major roadway that goes east-west there, 127th Street. There's no plans to move anything at the time, but it was done out of the limit dash, all the stuff was laid out. And I didn't know if you knew anything about that or if they
didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, this was, I don't know, a decade ago maybe or something. Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
They have like 3 governors in the cemetery, so it's a pretty well big established cemetery.
But they didn't have a road built over them.
No, they did not. They probably gets across the Potter's Field in the northeast section.
Yeah.
Next to the utilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said they moved them, but then they found out that they didn't.
So at Ritchie, the road that's right there adjacent to Ritchie Cemetery, we tried hard to find the records from the construction project. We never found them, but it was said that they removed burials when they excavated that out for the, I don't know where the burials went.
Lots of rumors.
Lots of rumors. So yeah, that's not uncommon.
2 acres of that cemetery got taken out.
Yeah.
Really? Jeez. To the south.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very interesting. I got the lovely opportunity to go to Vienna, Austria, last year for a conference, and it's very interesting to see how archaeology is treated in these different countries. There it just doesn't matter what it is, dig it up. Doesn't matter if there's burials, tactile burials, they just dig it up. Whereas here, I appreciate that we're trying, and we're not great about it, but we're trying to be more ethical about this, right? And like my colleague said this to me the other day, and it was a really good way to put this. It's like, if you go to a cemetery, are you going to go there and like dig someone up? And then why do we try and do that with Native American burials? What's the disconnect there that we've lost that sense of ethics to that? So I hope to see the U.S. continuing to move in that right direction to protect and preserve different burials. We'll see. So don't dig. Go.
Call you. Yeah.
Don't dig if you're in a cemetery, or you think you're in a cemetery, or if you for some reason find a skeleton, you call the police and you call the state archaeologist, or they'll call the state archaeologist. Call the cops. We're working at the Bender site right now. This is where our field camp is, and that's the number one question I get is, what if you find a body? And like, we stop everything we do. We call it. Like the sheriff already knows we're out there and is like ready for us to call to be like, we found someone, because that's not our job as archaeologists. Like, that's not what we're there for. We're there to try to find a homestead and like figure out, understand those patterns. So we need to do a better job of separating those things.
Thank you, Blair.
Oh,